So let's get into your second tour.
Right.
And I'm going to jump into this piece here. Back to the book. On April 14th, we received a radio call that Firebase Charlie was under attack by 2 regiments. 3,000 soldiers of the 320th NVA Infantry Division and 130 millimeter artillery shells were pounding the position. So you guys get this call. This friendly base is being overrun, basically. And here you show up on the scene. Now you're flying a Cobra, which for those of you that don't know, a Cobra is a gunship, as you just said. It's still in service today. The Marine Corps
still flying Cobras.
And very narrow, skinny. It's based on a Huey, right?
Yeah, it was. The Huey was designed and went to Vietnam, and most everybody's familiar with the Huey. The Huey took on a gun mission, though. That in Vietnam we saw the utility of guns on an aircraft. So the Cobra then was designed specifically and only as a gunship. And they took the Huey design, narrowed it down to 36 inches, pilot in the back seat, co-pilot gunner in the front seat, 2.75 rockets on the wing stores, minigun and 40 millimeter grenade launcher in a movable nose turret, and it was one killing machine. Yeah.
And it still apparently brings a giant smile to your face when you talk about that, which is lovely.
Yeah, and I don't want to seem twisted. I mean, I said at the time I was a kid living a dream, and I was, but I don't want to take away from the horror of combat, and it was scary as crap.
Yep.
On every single mission. But there's still something about a young guy going to war, at least a certain type of young guy, and those that were in the 2 units I served in, we were dedicated to what we did, and I think we did it well, and I'm still smiling about it. Well, thank you.
So far, every guy I've brought in to this podcast has the exact same attitude, so you're among friends here.
Okay.
So I'm going now. You guys are there. You show up with your Cobras. Back to the book. We made several passes on enemy guns. Bullets streamed past our cockpits as the NVA gunners tried to bring us down. Rolling in on a 51 position is always dicey. So this is a 51 caliber. It's a Dishka. It's an anti-aircraft
machine gun.
And they actually had those when we were in Ramadi. They still had Dishkas, and they used them against us. Tracers come at you and miss by a few feet. You try to get rockets onto him before he gets lucky and blasts you out of the sky. We took small arms hits. My knees vibrated like a sewing machine, but I focused on controlling the helicopter, lining up the gun sights, and shooting. I was scared, but had no time for it. Dan radioed, Dusty, Cyanide Panther 1-3. Panther 1-3, be advised, running low on fuel, out of ammo. We're breaking station for rearm, refuel. Roger 1-3, 4 gun crews taken out. Good work, hurry back. So you're radioing to the guy on the ground who's there. So there's an American advisor on the ground with a bunch of South Vietnamese soldiers. They're being overrun. You come in, you're taking heavy fire, but you're giving back fire. You tell him, hey, we got to go and get some more ammunition. He's saying, good job, hurry back. And when you do show up back, the NVA attack is now more intense. And here's the call that you get when you show back up. Panther, that's you, by the way. Panther, Pink Panthers is your unit.
Our call sign,
and
yes.
Your call sign is Panther. Here's the call you get. Panther, the battalion commander is dead. Acting commander wounded. Enemy broken through on the southwest. Put it there first. Then all around us, but real close. So for those people that don't understand what this means, when you're on the ground calling for fire, it's and I've talked about a lot of fratricide and blue on blue situations. I had them on my deployment, and it's a very scary thing, and it's even scarier from the air to the ground. It's hard for people to understand this. When you're in an aircraft, it's very hard to see what's happening on the ground. It can be very easy to get confused, and so it's hard to bring fire very close to your position unless you are just in a terrible situation. And so when you get a call that's saying put the fire all around us as close as you can, you know this is a desperate scenario. And so I'll go back to the book. Roger, Dusty, we've got him. After a number of Cobra attack runs, Duffy called, Panther lead, this is Dusty Cyanide. So that's the guy on the ground. That's his call sign, Dusty Cyanide. You've broken the enemy attack for now. Hundreds of bodies in the wire, maybe 1,000, but we cannot hold. After a short break, he continued, "We are leaving Firebase Charlie now. Stop them from following us, whatever it takes. Put your stuff right on top of the Firebase now." And again, this is something that it just... To explain what that means, if you don't understand if you're never in the military, to explain, you're calling for people to drop fire onto your own position so that you can get away. It doesn't get any more intense. It doesn't get any more dramatic. It doesn't get any more sketchy than that right there.
That was one hell of a fight. And John Joseph Duffy was the American advisor on the ground, and he is a true American hero. Army Special Forces officer, had those advisor duties. The battle lasted for about 2 weeks. The climax of it was a couple days with that last night that is described in the book. Out of a 470-man South Vietnamese airborne paratroop battalion, at the end of that fight the next morning, the American advisor, John Joseph Duffy, and 36 of the South Vietnamese were all that survived to be picked up when they got off of that fire base. And John was wounded 5 times in the battle. So yeah, 470-man battalion, 36 survivors, and their wounded American advisor.
Absolutely unbelievable. And I know you wrote in here that Major Duffy was recommended for the Medal of Honor, and he got the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions, which, if you don't know what that is, it's the second highest award underneath the Medal of Honor. Yeah, and you actually talk about possibly writing about that battle. Did you?
That's my next project. In doing this book, and there's a statement at the beginning of the book that I wrote this some 40 years after I experienced these actions, and some things were still perfectly clear in my mind. Other things were a little bit hazier than I thought they would be when I put pen to paper. So in the process of writing, I not only just dug down in my mind and relived every experience as detailed as I could to get everything correct, I contacted those who were also involved in the actions to get their versions, their view, their recollections, to be sure I had this as right as I could. John Joseph Duffy was one that I got a hold of, Major Duffy. I had never met him, had never talked to him since that battle until I was able to track him down with the wonders of modern communication and internet. And in sharing the details about that fight, he dropped a couple of hints. He said, somebody really ought to write the history of the Battle of Firebase Charlie. This is one of the most extraordinary fights in the entire Vietnam War. So I think it was after about the half a dozen times he said that, I said, okay, John, I'll do it. I'll write it. So yes, right now I'm working on doing my research and getting everything in order to write the story of that battle in more detail than I give on my couple of pages are in my book.
Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things for me about doing this podcast. And another thing we were talking about is there's so many, I didn't know about that battle, and I'm a pretty decent student of military history.
Right.
I didn't know about that battle and didn't know about Major John Duffy. I absolutely should, and we all should. And what you realize is that battle, that man, will never be able to account for all these heroes.
No.
You just can't do it. So, again, this is fast forwarding a little bit through the book. And by the way, I didn't mention the name of the book yet.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
The name of the book is Through the Valley, My Captivity in Vietnam by William Reeder. And get this book. So at this point, I'm jumping ahead a little bit to a situation where you've got, and I'll go to the book, tanks in the wire at Po Li Clang. Launch now and call me en route for their radio freak. Hawk's Claw will get up later. You'll be covering him too. You have tail numbers 053 and 682. Go. So that right there is something bad is happening and you got to go now. And what's interesting, and I'll point this out for, again, people that aren't in the military. By the way, a lot of guys that listen to this are in the military, a lot of law enforcement, but there's a lot of civilians that don't know everything that I'm talking about or that you're talking about. So what I like about this is that what they're telling the colonel to do is launch your aircraft. Just go get in an aircraft and launch and start heading in that direction. We'll give you a frequency when you get up there. We'll tell you what's going to happen once you get up there, but go. So again, this is an in extremis situation. What we would do that would be similar to this in the SEAL teams is we would go on QRF missions, quick reaction forces, where they would call, it happened to me where they'd call up and say, hey, something's going on here at this location. Go. And I'd say, who's the unit? We don't know yet. Any frequency, what radio frequency they're on? We don't know yet. We'll get it to you. Launch. We'd get in our vehicles and launch.
Yeah, you develop the situation en route, and then when you lay eyes on when you get there and start talking to the folks. Yeah.
Exactly. Back to the book. I stuffed a small emergency radio into one of the pockets of my survival vest. No time to perform the normal check on the radio. I had to include that.
There's a lesson learned there.
I had to include that. It's, the radio will always work if you test it. And the one time you don't test it is the one time it's not going to work.
That's the lesson. Check all your survival gear. Be sure it's in order, regardless of how hot that mission is.
Now, you're heading to a place called Ben Het. And I'm going to the book. We headed to Ben Het. As we crossed the last ridge line, the entire valley before us was filled with smoke. Tracers streamed outward from defensive positions inside the camp. Enemy tracers replied from outside. 2 jet fighters bombed next to the camp. NVA rockets, artillery, and mortars exploded in the camp. Enemy tanks breached the perimeter. One inside and partway up the hill looked like it had been killed already. I couldn't be sure. An Air Force AC-130 Spectre gunship was leaving. He'd worked the area over with 20mm Vulcan Gatling guns and 40mm cannons, probably hitting the tank. Enemy infantry moved through openings in the jungle canopy. I could see groups assembling to join the attack.
Yeah, it was one heck of a battle. This whole situation we're getting to in the book occurred during the Easter Offensive of 1972. When I arrived back in Vietnam at the end of 71, it seemed like the war was over. In fact, I was afraid that maybe I'd missed my chance for combat in a Cobra because things were so quiet. Most American forces have been withdrawn. In the central part of Vietnam, the Central Highlands where I was operating, there were no American ground forces left at all. Just some special forces guys, Army aviation units, and some Air Force units. That was it. How that changed as we got into the spring of 1972, because the enemy had been building up their divisions across the border into Laos and Cambodia. And in the spring of 72, they launched an attack from the demilitarized zone, an attack from Cambodia towards Saigon, and then finally in April, attacks across the Central Highlands where we were. And there were a lot of enemy. This day at Ben Het, of course, this is going to turn into the day that we're getting to here. But yeah, elements of 2 North Vietnamese divisions with artillery, with anti-aircraft weapons galore, and with armor going into the camp. And there we showed up with our 2 Cobras to do what we could do.
Was that your first time seeing enemy armor?
No. But that period was on the 24th, because this is the 9th of May. On the 24th of April, the enemy attacked the 22nd ARVN, that's Army of Vietnam Division headquarters at Tan Can, which is a little bit further to the east from Ben Het. So on the 24th of April, they attacked Tan Can and defeated and overran that NVA division with a number of tanks. So that was the first time I saw tanks in battle. Then we come out on the 9th of May, and I'm seeing tanks again.
Whole different ballgame for the guys on the ground.
Yes. Yeah, this guerrilla war suddenly turned into a very conventional war fighting regular North Vietnamese divisions.
Now, once again, you had some time on station. You did a bunch of shooting and running and gunning. You had to go back to reload, refuel, and I'm going back to the book now. On our way back to Ben Het, we could see the battle continuing at Polyclang. Vietnamese Air Force A-1 Sky Raiders dove, dropping bombs. We passed close enough to see one as it trailed smoke and flame and went into the ground in an awful explosion. I saw a parachute, and a mayday call came over the emergency radio frequency. I called headquarters to tell them I was diverting for a few minutes to help cover the downed VNAF, so the Vietnamese Air Force pilot. Negative, Panther 3-6. Permission denied. Proceed direct to Ben Het. Out. You tried again, same results. So you saw a South Vietnamese Air Force pilot gets shot down,
right,
and you call back to base and say, hey, I'm going to go cover for this guy when they try and rescue him, and they tell you no.
right.
Now, so you do what you're told here.
Yeah, decisions in combat. I mean, and there's
right.
pluses and minuses to that.
Yep.
There were guys on the ground at Ben Het in serious trouble. At Ben Het, there were 2 Vietnamese Ranger battalions, so probably 400 or 500 people at the most, probably 400 people on the ground at Ben Het with 2 American advisors. So there's 2 Americans on the ground. They are under attack by elements of 2 North Vietnamese divisions, which means thousands of infantry with the tanks and artillery and everything attacking. So yeah, they were in dire straits, though I really had hoped we could briefly stop over and help get this Vietnamese Air Force pilot picked up.
Yeah, no, that's a tough decision for command to make.
Right.
But from my position, I look at it like, okay, the command has a better overall view of the battlefield right now. And if they're telling me to proceed on to Ben Het, got it. Even though you, obviously, as a pilot, you have a little...
Good. I'm glad you have that perspective because I didn't have that at the time at all. So.
Well, it's easy for me right now sitting in the air-conditioned space with my headset on.
Yeah. So much in Vietnam, and warfare is different today. And I think things are probably much more planned out, and you go to according to a set of rules and procedures more than we did. So many of these combat missions with Cobras in Vietnam in that day and age, we would get launched out of our base, and we'd go out and make contact with people, and it was pretty much up to the pilot in command or the air mission commander to decide where he would go and how he would support and what was the hottest fire in town that needed help. So we always, and some of it was just, I guess, our pompous attitude too, we always felt we had a better handle on what was happening than the guys in the headquarters that made some of those decisions. In fact, when we first saw tanks in the area before that battle at Tan Can on the 24th of April, we saw tanks and reported them back through headquarters, and there was a great deal of reluctance on the part of anybody in the headquarters staff to believe that there were tanks. There was a guy that, in fact, this is another interesting situation at Vietnam at that time. The senior commander in 2 Corps, that area that I was operating in, was not a military guy. It was a civilian named John Paul Van. And Mr. Van made all the decisions. Now, to keep things legal, he had a 2-star Army general officer working for him, so all military orders came through the Army general, but Mr. Van was making the decisions. And when we reported we had seen tanks in mid-April, Van said, no, there's not tanks. He said, I fly out there all the time. If there are tanks, I'd have seen them. He said, what you guys saw are probably elephants in the jungle. So that's what we dealt with our headquarters.
Yeah, that's interesting. There definitely was, when I was in Iraq, there was very tight control over air-to-ground support, especially in the cities in Ramadi. It was very difficult to get bombs dropped. Right. But you know who had really good decentralized command was the tanks. And the tanks that we worked with, they would come and they had pretty good control over what, I'm talking the tank commander.
Right.
At least at the company command level, we had some company commanders that would just get after it and they would make stuff happen. So we felt really comfortable working with the tankers and they supported us over and over and over again. Really, like I said, with a lot of decentralized command. They had to use they obviously used discretion, but right. They had a lot of authority out there, which was great for us.
Which we did as well, which was really good. So at any rate, you left me. I'm going back from we rearmed, refueled to Kontum. We're heading back up. We were denied permission to deviate over to Poly Clang, and we're getting back into it at Ben Het one more time.